Well, good morning. Greet each of you in Jesus' name. I'd like to clarify it was not my wedding. My wedding was quite a number of years ago. The last boy that we had at home got married on Friday evening. Our son Hans married Sky Troyer from our community, and we're very glad for them. The topic that I was assigned is a topic on stewardship. And stewardship is a bigger subject than you can discuss in a week. Start out with a little story. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, and I had the privilege as a child to grow up between two different farms. My grandparents on my mother's side owned two farms, one in Venango County and one in Butler County, not very far from each other. One was just north of the county line and the other one south of the county line. We lived on the one farm and my grandparents lived on the other, and then I was able to go spend extended periods with them in the summer on what we called the Butler farm. I very much enjoyed growing up on that farm. I didn't have many playmates. I was the oldest in my family. I had only sisters, and they were younger than I. I did not have any cousins my age, and the neighbors were few and far between. But I had plenty to do. It was a farm in a little valley, as they have in western Pennsylvania. There was a little road that came down into the valley, and then the farm lay on both sides. It was the type of place where you could go lay on the road and your mother or grandmother didn't yell for you to get off because there wasn't anything coming anyway. It was a very rural, quiet place. We had a big bank barn, we had a spring house, we had a pond, we had a strip mine. It was a wonderful place to grow up as a child. One of my favorite things as I grew up on that farm in the summers was I'd get up in the morning, and I didn't really have anything particular to do. I had a few chores to handle. My grandmother would feed me a big breakfast, and then I would trips out the door and go across the road to the old farmhouse, which lay on the east side of the road, and that's where my great-grandmother lived. She could not do much anymore, but she was always glad for company. So I would rap on the door and she would come, bring me in, set me on the sofa, feed me candy, and tell me stories for as long as I wished to stay. That is a pretty good childhood to have. She did not have an easy life. She never was really a complainer, but as I reflected on her stories later, I realized that she had a hard life indeed. Our family comes from very poor stock. We were very poor people. By the time that I came along, we were land poor, meaning we didn't have money, but we had land. She was married when she was 13 years old. That is young by our standards today, and even in the day in which she was married, she was on the younger side, but she was married at 13 to I think he was 17 years old. They started out farming on a rented place for a number of years, and then finally through saving and some help from the parents on both sides, they were able to make a down payment on a farm, which was this farm that I then had the privilege of growing up on in the summer times. It was not a large farm. I think it was about 60 acres. They milked cows, they did some row cropping, sold some produce, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. They weren't married very many years. In fact, they had just happened to buy the farm when the Great Depression struck in the United States, and it became very difficult financially. It was very difficult for them to make their farm payment. In fact, over that period of time, most of their neighbors lost their farms. The farms were repossessed by the bank and then resold to other owners. They were determined that they were not going to lose their farm. They had to work very hard. They milked cows. It was a small herd. I don't recall how many it would have been, but I imagine it was less than 20 cows that they milked. And then he had to get a job working out. He was able to get a job working for the government on the roads. So he would leave and be gone 10 to 12 hours a day. He received $2 a day for his labors. Well, he would get up in the morning, he would do the morning milking, and then he would go to work. And then my grandmother would do the field work during the day with her children. She would take them along to the fields, tie them to trees, and then run the tractor round and round till she was done with whatever needed to be done. In the evenings, he would come home, they would eat a quick supper, and then they would go to the barn and do the evening milking. And then, in their spare time, they would pick coal. In western Pennsylvania, the land is kind of up and down. Here it's kind of flat, but there it's kind of up and down. And this place, I can see it in my mind today. I go there once in a while. It's still in the family. The old farmhouse sits on a little bit of a hill above the road. And then behind the farmhouse, there's a little flat space, maybe about half the distance from here to the fireplace. And then the hill starts going up, and there's a bank about 6 feet high. The yard levels off for about 20 yards, and then it goes up what we call the hill in the back. In your state, you would probably call it a mountain. We called it a hill in Pennsylvania. And the hill went up, and then there was a strip mine up on the hill. In my grandmother's day, there was no strip mine there. It was just the hill, but there was a hole in the hill. And that hole was like a little cave. It was evidently a place where some of the coal that was buried in the ground, that coal seam came out and was exposed, and over the years, people would gather that coal. They had a family coal mine. I never saw it. It was gone till I came around, but as they described it to me, it was a little hole in the hill that was about this wide, and it was not tall enough that you could stand up. You had to bend over to go in, and they had a little railroad track that went back into the hill. I have a little piece of that railroad, narrow gauge, but you would get on your hands and knees and put a cart on the rails ahead of you, a little coal cart, and you'd put your pick in the cart, and then you would push on your hands and knees that cart back into the mountain or back into the hill. When you got to the end where they were picking coal, you would climb up over top of the cart, your back scraping the top of the tunnel, and sit down in front, get your pick, and sit on the ground and pick coal out. And then you would lift it over your shoulder, put it in the cart. When your cart was full, you would turn around, and on your hands and knees, you would push it out to the end and dump it out. Coal, when you pick it, if you don't know, if you've never picked coal, is wet. It's sopping wet. You take it out to what we call a tipple, and then you dump it out, and it piles up, and it drains, and it dries out, and then the neighbors come with their gunny sacks, and you sell them coal for their stove and for heating. They had to work very hard, and they did manage to keep their farm. They always made their farm payments between milking cows, working out, day labor, field work, and picking coal in all of their spare time. You could pick coal late into the evening because it's very dark in the coal mine. It doesn't matter if it's the sun shining outside or if it's dark outside, you can still pick coal. She grew up working very hard. There was another thing I enjoyed about going to my grandmother's place in the summertime. She was a strawberry lady. She liked strawberry plants. She had lots of strawberry plants, and she enjoyed taking me out there and allowing me to just pick and eat and pick and eat. Her strawberry plants were on that little hill behind the farmhouse. As I said, it was maybe about 5 feet high, a little slope. My wife keeps her strawberries in rows, just kind of like continuous rows of strawberry plants. But my grandmother's strawberry plants were not like that. Her strawberry plants were single plants. I remember them as great big plants. She took good care of them. But there would be a plant, and then there would be a couple of feet, and then there would be another plant, and a couple of feet, and another plant. There were 3 rows of them along that bank behind the farmhouse. It was not until many years later that I learned something about those strawberry plants. I didn't actually learn it till after she was dead. My grandma and grandpa told me something about those strawberry plants. All those years that they were working hard trying to pay the farm, they barely made it. But the day came when the farm was paid for. They made the last payment to the bank. What do you do with your money after you've made your last payment? They never bought another farm. They never bought nicer things. They never changed the way they dressed. They stuffed the money into jars. They had this big, she used those blue canning jars, maybe you've seen those. They would just put the money in a jar. And when the jar was totally full, they would screw the lid on, and they would take it out back and they would bury it and put a strawberry plant on top of it. Then about in the 1950s, a coal company came and wanted to buy the coal that was in the hill. So they brought big equipment and they took the top of the mountain off, you would say, and exposed the coal. And then they dug the coal out and then just pushed everything back in big piles, and that's why we had a strip mine. I don't know how much money they got when the coal company came and stripped the farm, but they didn't have any need for it because their farm was paid for. So they just bought more jars. And they stuffed it into the jars. They didn't trust banks. The little bit of savings they had been lost when the bank closed down. The Butler National Bank closed, and there went their life savings. So they kept all their money in jars at home, buried under strawberry plants. 3 long rows of strawberry plants, and each one had a blue jar about 2 feet down, filled with money. Never in their life did they dig up a jar. They only buried jars. And then when they died, my grandfather, who was their only surviving child, went and dug the money up and spent it. He was very good at that. Some of you are very good at spending money. A couple of lessons about this. First lesson is a lesson about work. They survived financially as a family because they were willing to work very hard. They were willing to milk cows before light, and then he worked all day, and she worked all day, and then they milked cows again, and then they went and sat in a dark, wet coal mine and picked coal until it was time to go to bed. They worked very hard. I think I could believe that some of you work hard. Some of you work harder than others. Some of you have a relatively easy existence. You don't sweat a lot. You maybe don't even get very stressed out about your work. You have plenty of time on your hands to complain about your work. But some people have to work pretty hard. There are many people in the world that have to work harder than you to earn a living. Some of them do it begrudgingly, and some of them do it because that's the way their life has been. But there's a lesson about work. Work is a good thing. You will notice in the book of Genesis that Adam and Eve were given work, and they were given work before sin entered the world. Work is not a consequence of sin. The stress and maybe some of the burden of work is a consequence of sin, but work itself is not a consequence of sin. You, as a person, were designed by God to work. People who do not work are not happy people. People are happier when they have work to do, when they can finish a day and they actually worked and accomplished something. If you have children, you have probably picked up by now that your children are actually happier children if they have things to do, if they have some responsibilities, and if they have some work. The second lesson is a lesson about saving. They were very poor, but then there came a time when they were not poor. They never changed the clothes they wore. They never bought better vehicles. They never bought the second and the third farm. Just because you have more money, it does not necessarily mean that you must spend more money. Most of you, I believe it's possible that you could save, if you wished. You make enough money that you can pay for the things that you need and there is some left over. What do you do with what is left over? Do you save some of it? Do you give some of it away? Or do you just, let's go to the mall? Maybe you don't have malls around here. I don't know. I did not see any between here and Duluth. But do you just need to go to town because you've got money in your pocket? And you don't actually know what you need. And the reason you don't know what you need is because you don't need anything. And you're going to go look for something to buy because you have money to spend. There's a lesson to be learned about saving. And the third lesson is about use or investment. What should you do with money that you have earned and managed to save? I think that money is a tool, and if it's a tool, what should you be using your tool to accomplish? And do you think that burying it in a strawberry patch is really the best thing you could have done with it? Just stuff it in a jar, pack it tight, screw a lid in, dig another hole in a long row of strawberry plants, and bury it 2 feet down, and leave it there until you die, and then someone else will come and dig it up and spend it. Is that really the best thing to do with what you have? Do you have the little clicker for the PowerPoint? And what about you can just plug that in for me. Stewardship is recognizing that everything belongs to the Lord. Psalm 24 says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. That's a pretty big statement. God is not in the habit of telling lies, so this is true. He says that I own the world and everything, I own the earth and everything that is full of the world and they that dwell therein. There are two different words used there, both in the English and in the original. The earth is the Lord's. The word that's translated earth, it actually refers to the rock, the dirt. You know, the ball of dirt that we live on. That belongs to God. The physical world belongs to God. And everything that it is full of. The trees, the resources, the animals, all the things that the ball of dirt is full of belong to God. He says the world belongs to God, and that word world is more the word that would be used for like the system. In nature, there is a system that works together to maintain life. The sun rises and the sun sets. The earth spins on its axis. There's spring, summer, winter, and fall. The systems that make our lives possible, those belong to God. And all the people that live here, everybody belongs to God. That is all-encompassing. It doesn't leave anything for me to own or you to own. He says, I own it all. I own the ball of dirt. I own everything that's on the ball of dirt. I own the systems that make life possible. And I even own you. Pretty all-encompassing. Stewardship is recognizing, first, everything actually belongs to Him, and there isn't anything really that belongs to me. Stewardship is seeing the things that we have, the stuff, as tools in the God-man relationship. And I like this verse right here. I don't know what type of sense of humor God has, but He displays a bit of it here in Psalm 50. He says, if I were hungry. Now you get hungry. Does God get hungry? No, God does not get hungry. But He says, if I were hungry, I would not tell you. Why? Because the world, the systems are mine, and everything that the world is full of. I can actually take care of myself pretty well. I actually do not need you. There's nothing that you can actually do that I need or must have. Well, if this is true, if it's true that God actually does not need us, then why do we exist? And why do we have all the things that are within our management? Well, it's because God wants to use things to have a relationship with you. I think God allows us to use things just so that He can spend time with us and teach us lessons. I think the examples we have come in family life. Everything that God did is done for a purpose. So you think about the way a family works. If you understand a family and the way that it naturally works and the way that it should work, you start to learn some things about God. So you think about a good mother. A good mother who has a little girl. Does it make any sense for a mother to allow a little girl into a kitchen? It makes no sense whatsoever. But good mothers do it. They don't mind that all of the dishes got pulled out of the cupboard and whatever we were making, it got spilled across the floor. And she jabbered incessantly for 2 hours. Why? Because a good mother is willing to allow her things, kind of like her life, to involve this little girl, even though the little girl is inefficient and causes messes. Why? Because she wants to spend time with the little girl and she wants to teach the little girl things. So she will put up with having the little girl in her life, when it would be much more efficient for making supper or cleaning the house or whatever she had to do that day if the little girl was penned up somewhere. Why does a good father allow his boy to trail him around the job site or in the shop? It is not more efficient. If you're trying to fix your tractor and the little boy is there, he's asking 10,000 questions, some of which he already knows the answer to, but he's asking questions and you're trying to repair the tractor. You don't have the little boy in the shop because you really need him to give you advice on how to get the tractor running again. He doesn't have any good advice to give. And the one little part that he is going to walk off with and lose in the yard would be the one little part that you had to have to get the tractor running. And then you're going to run over it with the lawnmower where he left it in the yard and you have to fix the lawnmower yet. It's not very efficient to have little boys helping you do work. Why do good fathers allow little boys to help them with their work? It's not because of efficiency, it's because they want to spend time with the boy, they love the child, and they have things to teach the child. They're willing to put up with the inefficiency. That is exactly why you are allowed to exist. God is willing to put up with the inefficiency that is you, because He loves you and He wants to spend time with you, and He will even let you use His things so that He can interact with you and teach you lessons that you need to learn. Stewardship is recognizing that God uses people to build His kingdom. Oops. Ahead of myself there. I love this passage from 1 Corinthians. Apostle Paul said, "We are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building. According to the grace of God which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereupon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ." Apostle Paul, he says we're laborers with God. We work with God. And I've heard this before. I've heard a little boy saying he helps his dad build houses. Does he really help his dad build houses? Oh, he's on the job site. He's keeping the conversation going. He maybe occasionally runs and gets something, but he did not build that house. But in his mind, he helped Dad build that house. And it's a source of pride to him. The Apostle Paul says, we're laborers together with God. We are working with God. It's not quite an equal relationship. God's doing the work and you're piddling around the edges. But even the Apostle Paul would say, we work with God. So you can kind of pat yourself on the back a little bit sometimes when you have done something that is right and you see the good consequence that comes of it. And in a childlike way, if you keep it childlike, you can say, me and God, we did something there. It was actually God that did it, and you piddled around the edges. But we are laborers together with God. It says, ye are God's husbandry. That word husbandry, it means field work. So we would say like garden work or field work. You are God's garden, or you're God's field. What type of gardener or farmer do you think God is? There are some people who, they have a garden, but then it doesn't get too far into the summer till they have to use the lawnmower to go down between the rows. Do you think that's the type of gardener that God is? No, I think God is the type of gardener who really enjoys working in his garden. He waters, he fertilizes, and he pulls weeds. You are the garden. You're the thing that's being watered, all the blessings that he's putting into your life, like family and church, the ability to learn. You are the ones he's fertilizing. You sat in church and the preacher preached and it kind of actually hit. And you knew that that sermon was for you that Sunday. You read something in your devotions and it hits, it lands, and you knew that, yeah, this was the passage I was supposed to read this morning. He pulls weeds in your life. That's not as enjoyable, but the alternative is that he has to run the lawnmower down through the middle. And if you knew the whole story, you'd much rather that he pulled the weeds and had to run the lawnmower down through. He'll run the lawnmower down through if he needs to. That can be shocking and painful and difficult. You're much better off to let him pull the weeds. You're God's husbandry. You're his garden. It says you're God's building. And I like to think of that as a building project. All of the houses we've had were fixer-uppers. You looked at it and you saw some potential, and you could get it at a good price because nobody else saw potential there. They thought it was like a tear-downer or a burner-downer, and you said, that's a fixer-upper. And I think that's how God probably looks at you. He looks at you and he says, that is a real fixer-upper. It needs a lot of work, but God can see the potential that other people don't see. So you should be glad if God takes an interest in your life because he thinks you're worth fixing up. He's not looking at you and saying, well, just push that one over. It's not even worth trying. And for most of us, God has to work for a long time. It's not like a 6-month project, it's like a 70 or 80 year project. And it's still not quite done at the end. You can turn your Bibles to either Matthew chapter 25 or Luke chapter 19. Matthew 25 or Luke 19. I'm not going to read either passage. It's the same story in both passages. Jesus taught by way of parables. He would tell a short story and then he would apply it spiritually. We call this the parable of the talents. I think we can also call it the stewardship parable. You can look down over the passage as I describe the story briefly to you. You know the story very well. You've known it since you're a little child. There's a rich guy, and the rich guy is going to go away. But because he's responsible, he doesn't just up and leave. He calls in the people who work for him, and he divvies out responsibilities. You're supposed to take care of this, and you're going to do this, and you over there, this is what you're supposed to do while I'm gone. And then he goes away. They do whatever they do. and then later he comes back and everyone is called in to give an account of what they did. I think there are some principles we can learn about stewardship. First principle is about a master-servant relationship. In the story that Jesus told, there was one master and then there were multiple servants. And that's kind of how it is. There actually are two masters, but you can only pick one of them. One of them is good and kind and benevolent, and the other is hateful and spiteful, but you may pick which one you want. You may only pick one master, and that one master has multiple servants. The servants are assigned responsibilities. In the story that Jesus told, they were not assigned equal responsibilities. They had different responsibilities. I have different responsibilities in my life than you have in your life. And we all carry different loads of responsibilities. That's okay. That's good. That's the way God makes it. God wants everything to get covered. The master who went away, he knew everything that needed to be taken care of, so he assigned everything to someone. God has assigned something to you in life. You may not have found out what it is yet, but there is something you are to do, and it is something that you are to do. It is something that he is expecting you to accomplish for him. There is a master-servant relationship in life. There is the idea of ownership in the story Jesus told. The master owned everything, and he had the right to divvy out responsibilities. We believe that God is the creator and owner of everything. What does it mean if you own something? I don't know how many vehicles would be on this property right now. I imagine there's several dozen. When you go to leave here on Friday, you don't just go out to the one that's closest and load up and head for the house. We have this idea that this one belongs to me and that one belongs to you, and you don't use mine except you have permission. God owns everything. Anything that you're using by permission. You were given that and you're responsible for it, but it actually doesn't belong to you. You're simply what we would call a steward. The third and the fourth principles are the principles of trust and expectations. These I even put on a slide together because they're like kissing cousins. They're pretty close. They're tied together, kind of hard to separate them. Trust. The idea of trust is that you don't leave your things with just anyone. Maybe if you're a married couple and you're going to go to town for the evening or you're going away for the weekend, you don't drive down the road and just come to some random house and pull the van over and, hey, children, get out and go up and knock on that door and tell those people you're going to be here for a while and we'll come back and get you. You don't leave your children with random people. Where do you leave your children? You leave your children with people you trust. That if they need fed, they're going to get fed. The diaper needs changed, the diaper will get changed. If they're out playing in the middle of the road, they'll yell at them to get off the road. They'll do what needs to be done. You leave your children, the things that are important to you, with people you trust. If you are at Family Focus Week and you have a business that's still operating somewhere, somebody's working today. And you must trust them because your reputation's on the line. They're doing it and you're here. You trust them. Maybe you have animals at home. I saw on the little instruction sheet you can't bring pets. Some of you have cats and some of you have dogs and chickens and maybe you have cows and horses. Who's taking care of them? Well, you didn't pick somebody you didn't trust. Like the horse is going to be dead when you get home because, oh, forgot to feed it. Sorry about that. Forgot to water the cows, you know, whatever it is. No, you left your things with somebody that you trusted. God has trusted you. What types of things has God trusted you to have? You could make a long list. If we start with the important things, He's trusted you to have His Word. There are people in this world that don't have this. and you probably have several copies, some of which gather dust at your house. Hopefully they don't all gather dust at your house. But you were trusted to have this. Most of you were probably trusted to have a Christian upbringing. You didn't remember a time when you didn't go to church and you didn't know about God. There are many people in the world, there are children in the world today that they don't know anything about God. We have some children at home, they've been coming to church with us for about 4 years, and in the beginning, like, they didn't know Noah and the ark. Like, they don't know that story. They don't know any of those stories in the beginning, because they weren't given what you were given. You were given family and friends and church. And then on top of that, you have jobs and money and things. The less important of the things you've been trusted with very much. Expectations go with trust. You only leave your things with people you trust because you expect they will handle your things in a certain way. And Jesus said as much. He said, "For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be required." I know very few of you here, exceedingly few of you, but I will bank that you are people who have been trusted with very much. You have God's Word. You have a Christian heritage. Whether you build on it or throw it away, you were given one. You have family, and you have friends, and you have church, and you have the ability to work. You have sound bodies, sound minds. You can work. You are actually taught to work. That's a gift as well that not everyone has. You have money and you have things. You have places, houses, property. You are people who have been given very much in a global sense. I think when we come to the judgment, I don't know exactly how it's going to be, but it says we're all going to be there, and the books are going to be opened, and we're going to be judged out of the things that are written in the books, according to what we did. In my mind, I see it as you come before the judgment, your name is called, and you come forth. You are the type of people who will be standing there for a very long time, because you have been given very much, and you're going to have to answer for a great deal. Trust and expectations. The idea of absence is there in the story Jesus told. The master went away into a far country. And when you're reading a story in the Bible, you need to think of it in a biblical context. So the story that Jesus told about the master going on a far journey was told 2,000 and some years ago. There were no cell phones. So the master gave you a set of responsibilities, and he went away. And tomorrow afternoon, while you're trying to do your job, some question comes up, and you're not sure what to do. If that happened today, if Jesus told the story today, you would get your cell phone, and you would call him, and he would answer, or if he didn't, you would leave a voicemail, and he would get back to you, or you would WhatsApp him, or you would do something. You could get in touch with him. Jesus told this story in a day that when the master went away on a long journey, you didn't even know where he was, and there was no chance of contacting him. You were on your own. And you still had to give account when he came back if you got it wrong. Now, I don't believe that God goes away from us in an absolute sense. He is always available through the avenue of prayer, and he left us all sorts of principles on which we can make decisions. We can pray to God and ask for counsel, and he will give us counsel. But when you're in a store, it's never happened to me yet that I'm reaching for something and a voice from heaven calls out, "Don't buy it." God does not shout down from heaven and tell you to get out of bed in the morning and go to work. In a sense, God is willing to be absent. He's given you responsibilities, and then he's going to step back, and he's going to see what you do. You can ask for advice if you want, but in some things, he's just going to point back and say, "I gave you that. You have my principles. Let's see what you do." Absence is followed by return. The master came back and they all got called in. And they all had to explain what they did. And there were consequences. Sometimes we talk about the rich people. You have talked about rich people before. We're going to do a little group exercise here. You're going to talk to the people who are near you. So maybe like these two here, you turn around and talk to those two couples. You're going to talk in little groups. I want you all to come up with a definition of rich. What does it mean to be rich? And I don't want you to pretend to be spiritual, kind of like to have family and friends. No, I'm talking about what you really mean when you say somebody is rich. That guy is rich. What do you mean? I want to know how much money you're talking about when you talk about the rich people. So you get in your little groups and you define rich. Don't give me any of the pious answers. I want the real answers. In your mind, what does it mean to be rich? I want dollar amounts. 30 seconds, so come to some conclusions. Quiet down. Okay, in the amen corner over here, how much do you have to be rich? You can't decide. You don't have any dollar amounts.
Well, it's different for different people.
How much is it for you?
For me, it'd probably be like 150.
150,000 a year? Okay. Oh, what about back in here? What group were you in? What do they think it takes to be rich?
I don't think we decided either.
You're going to have to give me a dollar amount.
I think he's about right. About 150 would be a lot, you know.
150 would be a lot.
If you want to think about it, somebody that's really rich, you have to think about Donald Trump, where he has gold pit handles and everything, but I don't think we're in that category.
Okay. About back here somewhere. What's it take to be rich?
We decided about 100,000.
100,000. Okay. Yeah, you.
Sounds about right. 150,000 a year of income.
Okay. Somebody over here.
By the time you're 50 or 60, I would be worth $2 million and revenue coming in and own a Tesla.
If you owned a Tesla out here, you'd be stuck because there's nowhere to charge a Tesla around here. You'd be a very poor person around here. Maybe you could raise chickens in a Tesla out here. Okay, someone over here. What's it take to be rich? You. Yeah, you.
I'm not sure what you said. If you want a Lamborghini?
A Lamborghini? Okay. You do have straight roads out here. You could probably drive fast and wrap yourself around a pine tree. What does it mean to be rich? Median income in the United States in 2021, this is median household income, I should have included that word, $70,784 according to the Census Bureau. So that data is a year old. You can't get this year's Census Bureau data yet. That's median household income. Let's break that down. What's median mean? Median means middle. So if you lined up all of the families in the United States in a line, from the family that makes the least amount of money to the family that makes the most amount of money, and then you went to the exact middle of that line and pulled out the middle family, they make $784 a year. Let's just round it and say $70,000. The middle family. Now, median is different than average, and average is not good because that gets skewed by either lots of poor people or rich people that just make bundles and bundles of money. Median is the middle family in the United States. Now, it is household income, so that's dad, mom, and any of the children that are working in that family. Everybody that lives under that roof, put all of their income together, in the middle is 70. So where do you fall? You top of middle or bottom of middle? Do you know? If you don't know, if you're younger here, you go say, the teacher said, I gotta know, Dad. So like, where are we at here? Like, what was the 1040 number last year? And then we'll add in what mom made should have been on there. We'll add in what the children made. But you answer for yourself, not out loud. Are you on the top half of middle or the bottom half of middle? I actually looked it up for Minnesota, and Minnesota is a titch higher. Minnesota is 77,000. So I don't know if it's the people in Minneapolis who are bumping the number up, or if it's all y'all out here in the sticks that y'all don't have anything to spend money on, so you got all this money, and I don't know if y'all bump the number up. But it's higher in Minnesota than it is in across the country. About 25% of American households earn less than $35,000 a year. So if your household is making 35 or less, you're in the bottom 25% for the United States. Actually, I have some of this on. Yeah, right there. I'm sorry. Yeah, 25% are making $35,000 a year or less. 35% are making over $100,000 a year. To be in the top 10% in the United States, your household has to pull in $173,000 a year. Anyone want to guess what it takes to be in the top 1% in the U.S. household income? Not as big a number as you think. $652,000 a year of income. But you know, the Bible says if you compare yourselves among yourselves, you're not wise. Okay, so this is the United States. This is a rich Western country. If we expand this idea of rich globally, well, how much money does it take to be rich? If you live in this country, it takes $652,000 to be in the top 1%. If you include all the families that live on this planet, and this is a loose number, like they don't have hard data for a lot of this. I know that they're estimating and guessing. And the most recent number I could come up with is a 2018 number on this. $34,000 a year. Puts you in the top 1% of households on this planet. How many people in this room live in a household that's in the top 1% in the world of income? Who are the rich people? You're the rich people. So when you come across a Bible verse that talks about the rich people, and we're going to look at some of those as we go along, that Bible verse is about you. Like you just write your name right on the top. When it's talking to the rich people, it's talking to you. You do need to understand that there is a difference between income and wealth. Income is what you earn in a year. Wealth is the pile that you have that you're sitting on. You know, what's accumulated, what you've been able to retain, your assets and your capital. A few interesting things about wealth in America. If you're interested, if you like this sort of thing, you need to read The Millionaire Next Door, written by Stanley and Danko. They're two financial sociologists. They studied wealth in America. Their findings are very interesting. Many with high income in the United States are not wealthy. They have high incomes, and it was interesting, I was listening for in your answers. Okay, my question that I had on the screen asked, how much money do you make? Some people define wealth by what you have. Okay? You can use one of the two, but you're measuring different things. Having a high income doesn't mean you're wealthy. I ran a paint contracting crew when we lived in Abbeville, and our clientele were what I consider to be very wealthy people. We didn't work for people like you. We worked for the rich people. And I had one particular lady, I won't say her name, but Mrs. D. We worked for Mrs. D about 6 months out of the year, every year, painting at her estate. I considered Mrs. D a very wealthy person. And then once in a while she would bounce a check. Her husband was the leading bone surgeon in the upstate of South Carolina. Very highly paid medical professional. They spent everything they had every pay period. And bounced checks occasionally. They were not wealthy people. They were high income people, but not wealthy people. The average Mennonite, the average Amish, do not have high incomes. In what we see at Anabaptist Financial, we're seeing only loan applications from the borrowers. The average Amish or Mennonite family that we're seeing makes, what do you think, a year?
35,000.
50.
Between 40 and 45. But the average Amish and Mennonite community is very wealthy. We sit on piles of generational wealth in real estate, properties, and business. And that's where we'll wrap it up for today. Are they to go to their break?
Yeah.
You have a 15-minute break.